Steve Jones sat on the rear patio, gazing at the sunset over the ocean. He mused that they should have relocated here ages ago. The allure and serenity of this spot were enchanting. Here refers to a small island off the north coast of Cornwall. Throughout their 22-year marriage, Steve's wife, Claire, persistently suggested, persuaded, and eventually convinced him to move from London to this place, where she and her family had deep roots. Improved transportation and technology, along with COVID, finally enabled him to work remotely enough to make the move feasible. With visits to the city limited to once a month, Claire, who still lived in London, regularly returned to the island to reconnect with family, friends, and, most importantly, her mother. They purchased the house from Claire's cousin 2 years prior, but only made the move 6 months ago. In the interim, Claire utilized her visits to undertake repairs and use it as a home base. Following the completion of extensive construction, the house now faced west, overlooking the bay, offering Steve a breathtaking sunset view as he enjoyed a refreshing beer. Originally a farm, the property retained nearby meadows and orchards, with signs of recent tree planting, likely part of Claire's landscaping efforts the prior spring. Trees and orchards appeared to be prevalent across the island, prompting Steve to ponder whether they served to shield against the brisk sea winds or, more likely, to yield the beloved cider cherished by locals. He conceded it was a wise decision. Claire had been right. Life on the island operated at a distinct pace, revolving around tight-knit circles, many of which comprised Claire's relatives. Claire reveled in her return home, seemingly acquainted with everyone on the island. As an outsider, Steve perceived a certain aloofness from the locals, yet he appreciated their direct mannerisms. The collective unity displayed by everyone impressed him, leading him to speculate whether it stemmed from the self-reliance essential for a small island community's survival. Steve and Claire crossed paths at university, both pursuing degrees in business. Claire focused on marketing, while Steve delved into new technologies. Their bond blossomed, culminating in marriage shortly after graduation, with a mutual decision to settle in London for enhanced career prospects. Though married for 22 years, Steve still finds Claire stunning. While her hair gradually shortened, now styled in a pulled-back fashion with a touch of golden hue accentuating her natural blonde locks, he noticed her concern over the slight weight gain she experienced over the years. However, he cherished the subtle changes in her physique, her silhouette becoming fuller, her hips and bust embracing a more pronounced curve. Her eyes retained their familiar hue, blue-gray with specks of yellow in the irises. Unlike Steve, she never appeared disheveled or opted for sweatpants, maintaining a timeless appearance. He had never witnessed his wife so elated, fully immersed in island life and actively engaged in various committee endeavors. Her current undertaking involved coordinating a solstice festival. Their daughters, Nicole and Michelle, arrived shortly after their wedding, grew up, and pursued studies at Durham University, a factor influencing Steve and Claire's decision to relocate. Based on their social media activity, the girls seemed to be relishing university experiences to the fullest. Despite Nicole's penchant for procrastination, Steve remained confident they had ample time to complete all necessary tasks. He found solace in the island's history, often indulging in evenings at the local pub, listening intently to age-old fishing tales. Several antiquated books chronicled the island's history, housed within a small schoolhouse doubling as a library and village hall for social gatherings. Surveying the attic of their home for the first time, Steve hoped to uncover more insights into the island's past. Amongst the aged beds, furniture, and toys, he stumbled upon a weathered box containing a handwritten manuscript titled Tales from the Island, authored by Melissa Taylor, his wife's maiden name. Seating himself on a wicker stool, he perused the manuscript, admiring the elegant, swirling script detailing a blend of ancestral stories and personal experiences. Illustrations of trees captured Steve's interest as he skimmed through the faded yet evocative text, piecing together fragments of the narrative. The tradition's origins trace back to 1287, during the Plantagenet era, when the law of the first night, also known as jus primae noctis, became part of marriage licenses. Under this law, the ruling lord held the right to spend the initial night with any newlywed bride within his domain. Steve recalled a similar concept from the William Wallace movie featuring Mel Gibson, though he suspected it to be a myth adopted by Hollywood for added intrigue. As he delved deeper into the text, Steve learned of the groom's anguish caused by this practice. To preempt any potential retaliation, elder women spent a night with the groom, eventually evolving to one of the senior women sharing the groom's bed to ensure fairness for the couple. For 2.5 centuries, the plague ravaged English society, decimating populations, including on the island. Following a severe outbreak in 1622, concerns arose regarding the island's viability, leading to serious contemplation of its abandonment. Following these events, rumors circulated regarding partner swaps on April Fool's Day, linked to efforts to populate the island. Widows were encouraged to seek companionship among younger men. With the onset of the Great War, nearly all island men enlisted in the British Army's ranks. Many never returned, prompting adjustments to the island's customs to provide unmarried men heading to war with surrogate partners before conscription. This practice resurfaced, albeit to a lesser extent during World War II. The narrative then transitions to Melissa's experiences in the 1950s. Despite challenges like the influx of outsiders and displacement of locals, the tradition persists in certain families. Elders staunchly defend its value as a cultural practice. Married women who've raised children offer surrogacy to 18-year-old men, easing concerns about pureness loss and imparting marital wisdom. Divorce remains rare on the island. This tradition also mitigates adolescent pregnancies seen as communal service with rewards after years of child-rearing. It curbs empty nest syndrome and extramarital affairs. Melissa recounts her own surrogacy for an 18-year-old named Robert when she was 46, while her husband focused on business. Robert's reward for planting trees during the festival was time in Melissa's marital bed, symbolizing renewal. The text suggests that Melissa's husband was aware of the arrangement, but never broached the subject. She observed Robert's evolution from a timid adolescent to a confident man. Their initial encounter was brief and awkward, but Melissa provided comfort, gradually fostering closeness. Throughout the week, Robert's skills and self-assurance flourished. Melissa not only addressed physical aspects, but also conveyed her desires, emotions, and relationship dynamics. Steve marveled at the remarkable tale, pondering its authenticity. While historical references lent credence, the narrative seemed improbable. It could either be the author's creative invention or a means to justify her narrative. Months later, Steve contemplated his return to the city for work. With Claire's extensive shopping list, he opted to extend his trip by a day to reconnect with old friends. Timing his departure after the festival, he aimed to be back by the following Saturday. Claire welcomed the news, anticipating Steve's assistance with festival preparations and his willingness to tackle her shopping tasks. The festival day engaged the entire island, featuring children's games and sports during the day and evening festivities with dancing and drinks for adults. As the evening program commenced, Steve met some islanders he hadn't encountered before, including John Fraser, his wife Angela, and their son Jake, who seemed close in age to Steve's youngest daughter. Jake's formal handshake struck Steve as odd, but the moment passed quickly. Among the island's oldest families alongside the Taylors, the Frasers, Steve once again felt like an outsider. While Claire and the Frasers delved into familial connections later that evening, Steve noticed a group of young men casting admiring glances at Claire. He couldn't blame them. She looked stunning in her chosen summer dress, highlighting her ample bosom and shapely legs. Their persistent looks began to irk Steve. Just as he was about to intervene, Claire's mother intervened first, ushering them all back to the cider bar. Steve chuckled inwardly, noting the wariness the young men seemed to have toward Claire's mom. Diana, however, commanded respect, a formidable figure and leader of the Council of Elders. It was clear where Claire inherited her striking looks. Diana Taylor remained a striking woman, more akin to Claire's older sister than her mother. He returned to watch the dancing, which engaged people of all ages. Steve felt the cider's effects, but decided he could handle more. Everyone seemed to share the same mood, making it a challenge for him to serve himself. Upon his return, he realized Claire was missing and began scanning the area. To his surprise, he found her conversing with Jake Fraser, who had moved away as Steve approached. "What's going on?" Steve inquired. "Jake is interested in landscaping work. I was discussing options and costs," Claire explained. "Do we have work for him?" "Yes, and there's a tradition of planting and rejuvenating trees around the festival time, so it's perfect." The mention of trees triggered memories of a manuscript Steve had recently read. "So Jake will be planting trees?" "Yes, he can start next week." Claire observed Steve's reaction. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Steve replied slowly. "What will Jake receive in return?" "Money, of course, but we haven't settled on the amount yet." "Will there be other arrangements besides payment for his services? What are you implying?" Steve pressed. "So this has nothing to do with the island's traditions?" Claire retorted sharply. "What traditions? You know about the solstice tradition." Are you insinuating I'm planning to have an affair with Jake Fraser while you're away next week? Claire broke into tears and fled, leaving Steve in shock. He started to doubt himself. What if he had wrongly accused Claire? He regretted drinking so much. His thoughts were muddled, making it hard to think clearly. He began ascending the narrow road toward their house, hoping a walk would clear his mind. It felt like the longest walk of his life. Perhaps he had misunderstood something or overreacted to the situation. Upon reaching home, Claire was nowhere to be found. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the sofa, succumbing to drinks and fatigue-induced sleep. The following morning, Claire still hadn't returned, leading Steve to suspect she might have spent the night with her lover. However, he suspected she was with her mother, a suspicion confirmed when Claire and Diana arrived at the door. Diana took charge of the conversation, berating Steve for upsetting Claire and insinuating he was never good enough for her. It was a barrage of words, difficult to keep track of, but the underlying message was clear. How dare he treat Claire that way? He listened quietly as Claire spoke, her eyes glistening with tears. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, he raised his hand to halt her mother. I have a straightforward question. Is there indeed such a tradition? And are you intending to sleep with Jake Fraser next week? Claire turned to her mother with a defeated expression, and everything clicked into place for Steve. Yes, Steve. Some old families still observe the tradition, or at least a part of it. The Frasers have requested its enactment, and we are obligated to adhere to it. I asked Claire to consider it. It encompasses everything related to a boy's coming of age. It's about education regarding how to treat women respectfully. It's not what you would consider lovemaking, nor is it an affair. This tradition, centuries old, has aided the island in surviving tough times. It's a vital societal obligation that we fulfill. It's the reason we have low youth crime rates, no divorces, just happy, tightly knit families. I'm sure you've noticed that yourself, Steve, he sighed. So it's all true. Married women are entertaining eager young men for the greater good, Diana retorted. Let's not be crass. You're an outsider and don't grasp the significance of this to us. It's deeply ingrained in every story we hear growing up here. If you were from here, you'd receive the same benefits at 18, making you a better man. I doubt you'd turn down such an offer, Steve. Nowadays, there aren't any ancient laws, plagues, or wars driving this. You do it because you find pleasure in it. Diana, care to share how many times you've fulfilled this role? With your charm, you've likely been sought after for numerous executions of the agreement. I imagine you've had quite a bit of enjoyment for weeks. Diana appeared momentarily speechless, but quickly regained her composure. Yes, I've fulfilled my obligations several times, and I take pride in it, just as you should be proud of Claire's sacrifice. Please, Steve, allow Claire to proceed. You can't grasp how significant this is to us. Steve turned to his wife. So, you're willing to do this? I believe so. I'm prepared to make this sacrifice. Like my mother said, I want to become integrated into society. My departure for university and marriage left many unhappy, as I didn't return here or fulfill the responsibilities others carried. Steve interjected. So, this is a sacrifice? Wasn't this something you desired yourself? It seems odd given how elated you were about my move to London. You seemed thrilled. Claire blushed, then continued. I simply felt relieved that I could handle everything without affecting you, and I'm confident it won't affect me. I'm absolutely certain it won't impact our relationship in any way. Besides, engaging in closeness with another man, deceiving others, being aware of what occurred, and keeping your oblivious husband unaware. Maybe you're onto something. Claire and Diana winced at Steve's sardonic reply. Then Diana intervened. Why don't we all take some time to cool off and discuss everything, now that everything is out in the open, as it should be, and nothing has transpired yet? Claire remained at their residence, but communication between them was sparse. Steve couldn't comprehend why Claire was considering going through with this. He anticipated her abandoning the idea, yet she appeared fixated on the island's tradition, regardless of its impact on their relationship. Claire insisted that transparency would improve things. She vowed to be forthcoming with Steve, even if it led to challenging discussions. Steve found himself somewhat taken aback by Claire's unwavering confidence and insistence that such an arrangement wouldn't impact their relationship. Diana returned on Wednesday while Claire was out, leading Steve to suspect they had privately agreed upon a meeting time. Can we have a talk, Steve? Steve gestured toward the kitchen table, and they both sat down. Firstly, I want to apologize. This shouldn't have occurred. And it's my responsibility, not Claire's, Steve responded. Claire is fully capable of making her own choices, and it seems this decision has already been made. Despite my reservations, she loves you deeply and believes strongly in your ability as a couple to navigate this, Steve replied somberly. Yet neither of you seem to grasp how deeply this affects me. It's a genuine betrayal. When I was 18, I wasn't here, and unlike everyone else, I didn't live my life with the understanding that this could happen to my wife. I understand, Steve, and it must be incredibly challenging. It's hard to convey how differently we view this. We don't perceive it as infidelity. It holds significant importance to us, and Claire sees it as a means to reintegrate into the island community. After a brief silence, Diana continued, What will you do if she agrees to this? Steve sighed, reluctant to voice his thoughts, but did so nonetheless. I won't tolerate it. Diana appeared to ponder the situation before speaking again. What if there's a way to balance things out? Perhaps giving you the opportunity to experience what you missed when you were 18. Steve must have looked as bewildered as he felt. Diana continued, I spoke with 2 other elders, and we reached an agreement that the elders would extend to you a similar arrangement as Claire's. Suddenly, a realization dawned on Steve. Are you proposing that I engage in carnal relations with Helen Brown or Moira Fraser? Memories of meeting these 2 women flooded Steve's mind. Helen, a widow from a young age, whom Steve presumed to be around his wife's age. With her long black hair and deep brown eyes, she maintained a slender figure and was undeniably attractive. Steve didn't know Moira Fraser well, but he knew she was happily married and related to the other Frasers. As the headmistress of a small school, Moira boasted reddish-blonde curly hair and a graceful figure, often showcasing ample cleavage. Steve lifted his gaze from his memories. Yes, Steve, the elders are open to offering this, demonstrating the significance of this to us. Claire's involvement was not taken lightly. Despite the apparent temptation, Steve found the entire proposal ludicrous. You're an exceptional woman, Diana, and also an elder. Aren't you also included in this arrangement? Diana hesitated, unsure if Steve was serious. If that's what you require, Steve, then yes, I consent. I won't be the one responsible for forsaking centuries-old traditions. Steve shook his head, astonished by Diana's willingness to go to such lengths. He dreaded having to explain this arrangement to his father and the authorities. You know, Diana, some traditions have overstayed their welcome, and it's appropriate that they fade away, Steve remarked. Diana's smile vanished. Our offer remains, Steve, and you won't regret it. I can assure you of that. Think it over carefully. When Steve recounted the incident to Claire, she already seemed aware of the elder's proposition, but Diana's involvement left her shocked and in tears. I never imagined she would consider this. It's all too much. I won't go through with it, Steve. This has to stop. Steve felt a wave of relief, finally acknowledging how bizarre the whole situation was. Thank goodness. I can't express how relieved I am. Claire cried and spent most of the night either apologizing or reiterating her love for Steve. The situation remained awkward and uncertain, with Steve still grappling with Claire's earlier intentions and her belief that the proposal was reasonable. On Friday, Diana returned, visibly angry about Claire's change of heart, accusing Steve of being a manipulative outsider who could never understand her. Steve grew weary of the accusations. Why don't you be honest, Diana, and admit that for you, this is just a way to taunt your husband? Diana was taken aback. Fine. If you want the truth, we're enjoying ourselves. Having a young man in our bed, obeying our every command, is a dream come true. We lavish them with everything repeatedly, and everyone in the Fraser family is gifted. Can you believe this? Claire groaned. Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom, please be quiet. You're ruining everything, Steve chuckled in response. Let her speak. It's the most genuine thing I've heard from her, he added. Diana attempted to interject, but Claire intervened, urging her to leave and not return until she supported her decision. It was the first time Steve witnessed Claire standing up to Diana, and he couldn't discern who was more surprised when Diana stormed out of the house. In the ensuing weeks, the situation remained strained. Claire incessantly apologized for considering the arrangement and for asking Steve to accept it. She felt bound by tradition due to her mother's influence and hadn't considered the ramifications. Steve grappled with the dilemma of returning to the city for work. He couldn't delay it any longer, but the idea of leaving Claire on the island filled him with dread. Sensing his anxiety, Claire insisted on accompanying him, taking time off from her own job. The divide between her and her mother widened. They didn't speak, and Claire never broached the topic of the tradition again. After much deliberation and concern, Steve concluded that he needed to trust Claire and embark on the journey alone. Claire attempted once more to persuade Steve to let her join him, but he understood that she was engrossed in preparing a major marketing proposal and needed time to focus. Claire promised daily calls and frequent communication. Steve departed for London. The journey, involving ferry, taxi, train, and subway, left him exhausted, and he collapsed onto his hotel bed by 9 in the evening. He phoned Claire, who promptly picked up, and they conversed at length, sharing details of his trip and the city's changes. London seemed to be in a constant state of construction. Following their chat, Steve promptly drifted off to sleep, utterly drained. Despite a few taxing days at work, he felt rejuvenated. Being away from the island had provided clarity of mind. He began to ponder his relationship with Claire, mentally replaying their conversations. The man who once sought connection with a younger man seemed as distant from the woman he wedded as from the nurturing mother of his children. He sensed Diana's excessive influence over Claire and was relieved by their argument. Diana had crossed a line, and he hoped it marked the end of it. Yet, he couldn't reconcile Claire's actions and her certainty that the agreement wouldn't affect their relationship, a thought that continued to nag at him. Suddenly recalling the trees planted on their property the prior spring, Steve froze. Claire had been making regular visits to the island over the past year. A sense of dread washed over Steve as he considered who might have planted those trees. Perhaps her fervent advocacy this time stemmed from a need to justify her prior actions. He dialed Claire, and she picked up promptly. "Steve," he began, "doesn't Jake Fraser have an older brother?" There was a brief silence before Claire replied casually, "Yes, I believe he does." Despite our family's long history, there was a gap. "Right, Steve. His brother's name is Glenn," Steve continued. "He's around 19. After a moment's pause, Claire softly admitted, "Yes, that's correct. And it was Glenn who planted the trees last year." Silence followed. Steve pressed on. "And what did Glenn Fraser receive for this?" Claire snapped out of her reverie. "Just payment, Steve. Their family handles all the landscaping on the island." "So you're not entertaining Jake Fraser at this moment, are you?" Claire sighed. "No, Steve, I'm not entertaining anyone. You need to let go of this jealousy." Before she could say more, Steve hung up, ignoring subsequent calls from Claire. He needed time to process. Finally, on Friday morning, Steve answered the phone, catching Claire off guard. "Steve, thank goodness you picked up. I've been worried," she exclaimed. "Indeed. That's all," Steve replied tersely. "Of course, I love you more than anything. What time will you be back tomorrow? Should we discuss this?" Steve's calm demeanor unsettled Claire. "I won't be coming back. I'll stay here for a while," he declared. Panic surged through Claire. "Please don't do this. We need to resolve this as soon as possible." Steve's tone remained eerily composed. "True, but you didn't rush to London to do so, and you only called me during the day. I understand your evenings have been quite occupied." "Please, Steve, come home. I haven't done anything. It's just your paranoia. Come home and we can work through this," pleaded Claire. 5 days later, Steve arrived back on the island via ferry. Upon reaching the house, Claire and Diana were already there, evidently aware of his return. Claire attempted to embrace him, but Steve pulled away, prompting Claire to burst into tears while Diana looked livid. "Why are you here, Diana? This is between Claire and me," Steve demanded. "Am I correct in understanding that you two never fought?" Before Diana could reply, Claire interjected, "We did have a disagreement, but when you didn't come home, I needed support, and you weren't here." Steve furrowed his brow. "It's hard to believe that my mother-in-law would reconcile without getting her way. Given her efforts to reach an agreement, I doubt she would relent. I assume you both conspired to cover it up, as I refused to participate." Claire's eyes widened. "This is spiraling out of control, Steve. I haven't done anything," she insisted. Steve persisted. "So you both agreed to lie and conceal it?" "Because I refused." The argument ensued, going around in circles. Steve was convinced Claire had been unfaithful, but she vehemently denied it. Eventually, he retreated to the spare room, leaving Claire and Diana alone. The following day, Steve braced himself for a difficult conversation with his father-in-law, Bill Taylor, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Despite their usual rapport, Bill greeted Steve with a handshake, acknowledging he'd been anticipating their talk. They delved into tradition, and Bill disclosed that roughly 20 years ago, Diana had a brief affair with John Fraser. While he disapproved, he likened it to a youthful escapade he himself had enjoyed at 18. Steve carefully broached Diana's admission of recent rendezvous, querying if it was plausible. Bill was dismayed, confessing he had sensed something amiss, and his absence on a commercial fishing trip had provided ample opportunity. Steve inquired of Bill if he was aware of his daughter's actions. Bill acknowledged that Diana and Claire were very close, but attempted to keep him in the dark. About a week before you left for London, they indicated that the plan was already set, he disclosed. Claire, seated at the kitchen table, couldn't meet Steve's gaze. "I can't believe my dad is going to divorce my mom, and we're the reason for it," she lamented. Diana made her own bed, asserting, "Your father would never condone this level of deceit and dishonesty. She continues to deny everything, despite John Fraser admitting the truth, and he's not the only one." After a prolonged silence, Claire murmured, "I know, that's why I feel I should tell you something." Steve remained silent. "I'm sorry, Steve, but I made an arrangement with Jake." The outburst Claire anticipated never materialized. "And last year with Glenn Fraser," she added quietly. Claire nodded in acknowledgement. Steve struggled to find words. "Please, Steve, this shouldn't alter our relationship. We've had 22 wonderful years together." "How can you say that? This changes everything," Steve retorted. "I'm deeply sorry, Steve. I felt compelled to fulfill family obligations," Claire explained. Steve seethed with anger. "That's absurd. You simply wanted to engage in relations with another man." "I did, and I enjoyed it so much that I did it again." "It wasn't like that. It was a duty, an obligation," Claire insisted. "So you didn't derive any pleasure from it?" Claire hesitated, aware of the precarious ground she was on. "It was mundane, unlike ours. Just physical, not carnal. It happened once. It won't occur again." "But it wasn't a one-time occurrence. You did it twice. You engaged in relations with both your brothers when they were barely 18. That makes you nothing more than promiscuous," Steve accused. Claire flinched at Steve's verbal assault. "I'm not like that. I was upholding a tradition. It's about guiding young men on their journey to manhood, that's all." "They were very appreciative," she defended. Claire realized she had made another error. As soon as she spoke, Steve erupted. "Oh, I bet they were damn appreciative. You claim it was a one-time thing, but how many times did you do this before they came of age? Tell me, how many times? If I were 18, I'd be damn eager to please. And having a woman at my disposal for the evening and night, that's at least 5 times a day, so maybe 35, once a week. It's unlikely to be just once." Claire couldn't deny it. Both Glenn and Jake were eager to please. Little training was required, though some patience was needed at the start of the week. She relished their sculpted bodies. Just as her mother had predicted, the encounters were thrilling. She particularly enjoyed teasing them with glimpses of stockings or cleavage, knowing that she would fully surrender to them that night. At one point, Jake even confessed his love for her. It was the only moment she realized how a week could impact her normal life and cherished marriage, and she wasted no time in clarifying the reality to Jake. Steve's tirade continued. "And what exactly does an 18-year-old need these days? I bet they had their sights set on you from day one, and you couldn't get enough, could you?" Claire wept. "It's not like that. It was meant to be a thrilling adventure. It was just physical. I know it stings your pride, but I only desire you, and you're the one who completes me." Steve became enraged. "I'd argue it's more about trust and vows than ego. What about your wedding vows? Does tradition override them? It's not ego when your life partner betrays you. And for what? Not for anything significant or with serious consequences, but for the sake of traditional lovemaking with some men." Claire blushed. "I understand you're angry and upset with me, but we're strong enough to overcome this. After Glenn, you didn't notice anything, but we grew closer. I thought it would be the same with Jake. I didn't know because I trusted the woman I loved selflessly. Believe me, I'll never do anything like that again." "Should I believe you?" "Trust you? You must be joking," Claire shot back, almost shouting. "You can, I swear. I'm truly sorry for hurting you. Think about the wonderful life we still have ahead. We can return to how things used to be." "Did you think about our wonderful life when you were scheming all this and lying on your back? No, I'd never have imagined this if I'd known the consequences. I'd never deliberately hurt you, but I did anyway." "I know. And I'm really sorry, and what do you think of it?" Claire was at a loss for words. "Clearly you don't grasp how I feel. You ripped out my heart and soul. How the hell can you fix this, Claire?" With that, Steve stormed off before he did something he would regret. He continued walking, attempting to clear his head, but even the beauty of the evening sunset failed to improve his mood. As he turned back towards the village, he was surprised to encounter Elder Helen Brown. Steve could barely manage a nod in return to her greeting. Helen smiled knowingly, acknowledging that their meeting was no coincidence. Observing Steve heading towards the cliff path, she anticipated catching up with him upon his return. Helen offered to sit on a rock ledge and cautiously inquired if Steve would share anything about his circumstances. Steve saw no reason to withhold anything and proceeded to divulge everything. Yet, speaking aloud failed to alleviate the weight burdening his shoulders. Helen listened attentively without interruption. Steve hesitated to mention Diana's proposition involving one of the elders engaging in carnal activity with him in exchange for Claire fulfilling her obligations. However, he decided to include it verbatim, considering Helen's involvement in the saga. Upon completion, Helen remained silent for a prolonged period before responding, "Steve, I never made such an offer. Diana never discussed any agreements with me or Moira. It's not something we would even consider. I suspect Diana was attempting to manipulate you into agreeing to extramarital relations to justify their plans." Steve was baffled by her response. Helen added, "Furthermore, these arrangements mostly vanished decades ago, and even then, it was only for the first night, never a week. Week-long arrangements were typically for household chores or planting, with one night of union at the end. Perhaps Melissa, Diana, and Susan acted out of necessity." Steve shook his head in disbelief. Just as he started to come to terms with his wife's actions, another shock emerged. Helen assured him that she would discuss the matter with Moira and take the necessary steps to strip Diana of her elder status. She acknowledged that it would be scandalous, as such actions had never occurred before, but deemed Diana's behavior unforgivable. Nowadays, elders are expected to engage in social activities and support the island's inhabitants. Helen gazed at Steve. "What's your plan?" Steve shrugged. "I can't get her to grasp the consequences, but I want her to feel what I'm feeling right now." They sat in silence until Steve noticed a faint smile playing at the corner of Helen's mouth. "What's amusing you?" he inquired. Helen's smile broadened as she proposed, "What if you stay with me for a week? Seriously, we won't let Claire and Diana in on it. We'll tell them I'm honored to accept the agreement offered on my behalf as an elder. That way, you give Claire a taste of her own medicine, and I get to needle Diana for dragging my name into this mess." Steve was intrigued but voiced concern. "Won't this injure your reputation? I'm still married, and people will talk." Helen dismissed his worry. "I couldn't care less about gossip. And truth be told, nearly the whole island already knows about your situation, Steve." The realization stung, but Steve's spirits lifted with a pleasant idea he shared with Helen. "Seriously, I'd love to plant some trees for you. It'll give Claire and Diana pause." They chuckled together and swiftly resolved all the details. Steve returned home and quickly packed his belongings. To Claire, he simply explained that upon reflection, he had decided to accept her mother's gracious offer regarding the island's elder, and given the circumstances, spending a week with another woman seemed quite reasonable. He left Claire in tears, pleading with him not to proceed. His time with Helen proved unexpectedly pleasant. She proved to be excellent company and a skilled cook. Steve busied himself with home improvements and even planted a few trees in the backyard. They also discussed Steve's predicament. He hoped this week would give Claire some insight into his feelings, but he soon noticed signs that Claire grasped the gravity of her actions. Reconciliation seemed out of reach. True to his promise, Steve refrained from closeness with Helen, though they came close a couple of times, not from lack of desire. Soon after, Claire confronted Helen at the village store, accusing her of having an affair with Steve. Helen responded with a sweet smile. "Claire, dear, you know well this isn't an affair. It's an arrangement, and it won't impact your marriage," Helen replied calmly, echoing Claire's own words. Claire persisted. "You can't do this. He's my husband, and you should know I'm fulfilling the offer made by your mother on my behalf. Who was it? Me, Moira, or even your mother for a week? Steve made his choice, and I'm bound to honor tradition. It could have been worse. He could have chosen Diana. I've promised to return him safe and sound, albeit a bit weary." Claire was taken aback. You old strumpet," Helen responded calmly. "I would have thought that term would be more fitting for someone who slept with 18-year-old boys behind her faithful husband." With that, Helen stormed off, leaving Claire speechless as the villagers in the shop watched. The next day, Claire, enraged and hysterical, attempted to kick down Helen's front door before Steve intervened. "Please, Steve, I'm so sorry. Come home. I'm just doing what you did." "Why are you so upset?" As you said, this shouldn't concern us. I had no idea. It's just cruel. It torments me. I can't stop thinking about you. And that old woman, Steve. Yes, it sounds familiar. Welcome to my world, he said curtly, slamming the door shut. Steve returned home the following week to a much quieter Claire. She started, I can't believe you did this to me, but I can forgive you if you can. I understand how you feel about all this. That's your perspective. You've only experienced part of it, not the deceit and lies. Our entire existence here is built on lies, Claire persisted. We're still the same people, the same marriage. The same marriage that led you to bed other men. A marriage you ruined, and I still can't comprehend why. Are you truly that tired of me? It was never about you or boredom. If we can't go back, we can build something new. Let's look forward to all those retirement dreams, to the things we could have together. Travel, grandchildren. We can still do it all. We still love each other, no matter what. It's not over yet, Steve. I will do anything to prove my love for you. Steve remained in the house, occupying the spare room, grappling with daunting thoughts about what he would do with his life if he left Claire. He couldn't determine whether failure or abyss best described his prospects. It's simpler to stay, and he still loves her. Considering the consequences, he doubted Claire would repeat her actions. The island was serene, and he had envisioned traveling, investing years in planning his options and sharing those dreams with Claire. Did he truly want to abandon it all? Claire pondered how it had come to this. It was all so bewildering. When her mother proposed an agreement, she turned it down. Yet Diana persisted for months. Then she encountered Glenn Fraser at a dance. He was exceptionally good-looking and wonderfully polite. They danced together multiple times at social gatherings, and they hit it off. Diana shared details about her own arrangements and how thrilling they were. She portrayed it as a guilt-free romantic escapade and never considered it an affair. It was simply tradition. Despite this, she knew Steve didn't see it that way, so she kept everything hidden. If he never found out, it wouldn't cause him any pain. The week with Glenn was marvelous. During the day, he planted trees and spent evenings in her bed. He was quite nervous, but incredibly charming and eager to please. By the end of the week, he had become a skilled lover. His size and physicality, combined with patience and technique, made him quite adept. Claire proved to be an excellent teacher. The week filled her with confidence. She felt like she had rekindled her sensuality, which had dwindled during the years of motherhood. Was it tradition or just illicit lovemaking, as Steve suggested? She had to acknowledge it was both. But didn't she deserve a bit of satisfaction? After devoting 22 years to raising children and being a devoted wife, she was certain it didn't damage her relationship with Steve. Things had never been better. She loved him more than ever. And after that week, they started making love more frequently. Jake appeared even more attractive, stirring feelings of arousal at the prospect of sharing her bed with him. Steve, always astute, uncovered the tradition. Aunt Melissa's memoirs had unwittingly spilled the beans. Claire and her mother attempted to persuade Steve to agree, but he remained steadfast. Reflecting on it, Claire realized that her decision to deceive him was perhaps the worst she had ever made. Yet she remained confident that once the pain subsided, she could win Steve back. All she needed to do was remind him of the strength of their relationship and their shared aspirations for the future. He would surely want to stay together for the sake of their daughters and future grandchildren. This argument could work in her favor. To Steve's surprise, their daughters arrived on the island just 2 days later. Nicole wasted no time in rebuking Steve for his alleged mistreatment of her mother, dismissing the notion of living apart as absurd. Meanwhile, Michelle appeared to be observing quietly, awaiting further details. A slight smile played on Claire's lips, suggesting she believed Steve had not noticed her manipulations and lies over the years. Apparently, she assumed he would shield their daughters from knowledge of her actions, prioritizing their protection, as always. However, all of Steve's doubts were dispelled. Claire had misjudged the situation entirely. Steve raised his voice in a manner his daughters had never witnessed before. Your mother was involved with younger men for 2 weeks. They were younger than both of you. She doesn't seem to grasp that. I won't condone this behavior, Steve asserted. Claire promptly refuted the claim, insisting that Steve had misinterpreted the situation and that the men were merely doing landscaping work. Steve had to concede that she was skilled. She almost convinced him. Both daughters sensed that something was amiss, though their father's suspicions seemed far-fetched. Perhaps he was beginning to lose touch with reality. While Steve might agree with that notion, he suggested involving Grandpa Bill or the elders to arbitrate the truth. Claire feigned a fainting spell, though it wasn't very convincing. All three stared at her, puzzled, awaiting an equally poorly executed recovery. Steve regarded her with disdain. I can't trust you anymore, it's over. There's no going back or forward with flashing lights. How will you face yourself in the mirror knowing you betrayed me? Nothing can undo that. And how will I feel, accepting this? We need each other, Steve. We've always relied on each other, making us both stronger. I'm right for you. Deep down you still know it. Don't throw away your life to punish me. I can handle this, Claire, but I won't let you ruin me. I'll forge a new path. We all must face our choices and stay true to ourselves. You'll have to live with the fact that you cheated, lied, and discarded what we had. I'll live with leaving the woman I loved, but you're not who I thought you were, not the kind and good person I fell in love with. I wish I could return her, but not you. Steve departed the island with his daughters, opting to rent an apartment closer to their university. The girls were stunned by their mother and grandmother's actions. He never returned. Before leaving, he set fire to the trees in the orchard. Claire watched the orange glow with tears in her eyes. Bill assisted Steve in selling the house since Claire lacked the funds to maintain it. The divorces of Diana and Claire created a scandal, sealing the fate of the remaining tradition. Diana was the first to be ousted from her elder position. Both she and Claire became social pariahs. No woman trusted or befriended them, yet they defiantly remained on the island. Several months later, Helen Brown resigned as an elder. Island residents noticed her spending less time there, eventually visiting for only a few weeks each year. When questioned, she revealed she now resides with her family near a place called Durham.